for letting us be a part of it for a minute. I am so thrilled about this event. So Sam and I had lunch a few months ago, and I heard this story, and I was on the edge of my seat. So I am so over the moon about being a small piece of sharing this story with all of you, and especially today on a day of incredibly good news about this, which I'm confident our speakers will get into tonight. But first, let me just say a few words about Oolite Arts. Oolite Arts has been working in the Miami region for 40 years to help artists make art. Some of you may know us as in one of our former names, the South Florida Art Center. We were founded by a late in life ceramicist named Ellie Schneiderman, who decided that it was her purpose in life to support artists in their daily endeavors. We provide free studio space to artists, as well as cash, the critical financial resources they need to live their life and make their work. We also send artists out to develop their practice in other countries and in other states at wonderful artist residencies that take place elsewhere. And then we bring them home here to show their work. We have exhibition space at our building here on Lincoln Road. I hope you'll come by anytime. I would be happy to personally give you a tour of the gallery show that's up. Upcoming, just a couple things in case we can get you involved in some of our programs. We give away about $500,000 a year to artists. That ceremonial event is taking place here on the beach on April 22nd. If we can get you there, please come talk to me or a member of my team after the event. That is Megan in the pink pants in the back, and Nuria Richards is right here. Many of you probably worked with Nuria to get here tonight. We also have a trip to New York coming up in May. If you want to join us, we'll be seeing some private collections and some very special events up there mid-May.
And our alum at the Whitney Biennial?
Yes, we have 2 alumni in the Whitney Biennial that will be with us. At least one of our alumni will be touring us around for his piece at the Whitney, Leo Castaneda. And we have a second alumni in the show. We also have alumni showing in New York at the same time, so we'll be looking to visit some of those shows with our artists. There's more information in the kitchen on the table if you guys want to grab these 2 pieces on your way out. And other than that, I just want to say thanks to, I'm sorry?
Venice.
And Venice. Oh, I would be remiss if I didn't put Venice. We have very few slots to on an international trip we're doing October 5th to 10th to the Venice Biennale. One of our artists, our alumni artists, of which there are 1,000 for Oolite Arts, that's how long we've been working, is in the Giardini this year. So it's a very special year for us, a very special year for Miami in particular. His name is Edouard Duval-Carrier. So he'll be with us in Venice for those few days. Please join us. Again, there are not a lot of slots. I'm sure it'll sell out pretty quickly. That's in October. So talk to any of us if you want to learn more. Get signed up for information. Other than that, I just want to say thank you to my board members, the hardest working board chair I've ever known, Maria Elena Angulo. And Eric Rodriguez, another long-serving. And yeah, I'm going to hand it off to Maria Elena to introduce our speakers.
Hi, good evening. Thank you all for being here. I have to start by saying that we wouldn't be here if it weren't for our dearest friend, Sydney Carpel.
Yay, Sydney!
Sydney introduced us to Sam, and anyone who knows Sydney knows. And she suggested that we have this event. Anyone who knows Sydney knows that if Sydney asks, we all say yes. Oh. So I want to say thank you to Sydney for introducing us to Sam and suggesting this event. And I want to say thank you to Marie, who very graciously said yes to Sydney and is hosting us.
But I also want to say it all came to be because of my blessed, my husband, my wonderful hero husband of blessed memory that we lost in September. I feel like he's with us because we all love him, and he put all of us together too.
He did.
Those of you who didn't have the honor to meet David Schachter, Sydney's late husband, was a Holocaust survivor. He survived 2 concentration camps, lost all his family, 100 and plus members of his family, and he ended up in Miami. He's one of the founders of the beautiful Holocaust Memorial, and we missed him a lot. But anyhow, so thank you, Marie, for saying yes to Sydney and for hosting us. Thank you, Harley, for agreeing to be our speaker tonight, and obviously thank you, Sam. So I would like to introduce briefly our two speakers for tonight. There is a full biography in the material, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But Sam Dubbin, he's a Miami native and a graduate of Harvard College and the University of Miami School of Law. Over a legal career spanning more than 4 decades, he has held senior roles in private practice and federal service, including positions in the Justice and Transportation departments during the Clinton administration. He's currently a partner at the firm he co-founded, Dubbin and Kravitz. For more than 25 years, Sam has been deeply involved in Holocaust-era restitution and asset recovery cases. His work has
Can I add, on a pro bono basis?
on a pro bono basis.
So that makes it really all the more impressive.
Yes. His work has included the successful litigation in the Hungarian gold train case, which resulted in a $25.5 million settlement and a formal U.S. government apology. He has also represented survivors and heirs in claims involving unpaid Holocaust-era insurance policies and has long served as counsel to the Holocaust Survivors Foundation USA. Today, he is co-counsel to the, I forgot to ask Henry. Cassier family in their long-running effort to recover a Pissarro painting looted by the Nazis. The case we'll be discussing tonight, and if you look in your package, I believe there's a picture of Henry a couple of weeks ago in front of the piece that we are talking about. So Sam is joined by Harley Lippman, founder and CEO of Genesis 10, a major IT staffing and consulting firm he established in 1999 and grew into one of the largest privately held companies in its sector. A graduate of Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs and a Fulbright Fellow, Harley is widely recognized for his leadership in business as well as his work in international policy and diplomacy. Again, there's more detail. Harley has a lot that he's done that is great, so I have to really summarize. Across multiple U.S. administrations, he has been appointed to the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of Americans' Heritage Abroad and currently serves as USAID's Middle East Partnership for Peace Act Advisory Board. He's also a frequent geopolitical commentator, appearing on outlets such as CNBC, BBC, MSNBC, and Al Jazeera. Alongside his professional work, he's deeply committed to philanthropy, supporting education initiatives, veterans, and underserved communities. Please join me in welcoming Sam and Harley.
So Sam is really a remarkable person. When I read his bio, yeah. Sam is a remarkable person. You know, when I read his bio and I saw that he went to Harvard, top of his class, and then he goes after that to University of Miami Law School. Miami Law School is a great school, but I asked him, I said, that's a big change. And basically he killed himself for 4 years at Harvard, and then he realized he missed a few things. He missed girls, and he got a scholarship to University of Miami, and he wanted to have some fun. So he comes down, so he decided to come back to Miami, where he grew up, a native of Miami, and shortly after he got involved with Holocaust restitution work, helping to support families and individuals whose parents or grandparents had art stolen from them during the Nazi era, or had insurance policies that insurance companies wouldn't pay to the victims' families. And Sam has done an extraordinary job over a period of over 25, somewhere between 25 and 30 years, fighting City Hall, as they say. And today is a remarkably historic day. And I want to ask you, Sam, could you tell everybody what happened today?
Sure. Let me start by thanking, the other person to thank for, where we are tonight is my wife, Lori, who's been, at my side in major battles, legal and political and otherwise, for which I'm grateful. When I got involved with the restitution of looted art and this litigation over the Pissarro painting that we'll talk more about, the issue in that case came down to whether or not Spanish law or American law would apply, because the painting was owned by a Holocaust survivor who ended up in California, where he retired, which is where he lived when they found it. But the Kingdom of Spain had acquired it after 50 years of it being traded underground. So the court in that case decided that Spanish law would apply. Now there's a federal statute that specifically says that, and under Spanish law, if you have it for 3 years, you get good title to stolen property. Really? That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, especially if you get it in bad faith, which they did. But the court ruled contrary to what the statute provided, and this was a statute Congress enacted in 2016 because the devastation of the Holocaust, physically, emotionally, and the fact that museums and collectors were hiding these things forever. Congress said, you know what, we're going to allow people to bring these cases regardless of how much time transpires. And they passed a law that said that, but the courts, like in my case, were not observing that. And there were several other kinds of decisions like that that not only disregarded what Congress had intended, in a major piece of legislation, but found other ways to, instead of what we would have assumed would have been bending over, at least giving an equal level playing field to Holocaust victims and their families, it was the opposite. The courts were going the wrong way every time. So we put together legislation along with a gentleman named Joel Greenberg, who had founded a not-for-profit foundation to help families recover their assets.
Very generous philanthropist.
And he's one of the largest funders of Holocaust survivors' needs, because half of the survivors in this country and the world live in poverty, which is not that well known.
If I could jump in and just add to what you're saying, that's a great point. Half the survivors of the Holocaust live in poverty. And Joel Greenberg is subsidizing them. I mean, he really is a remarkable individual.
And so he, with his leadership, and with my knowledge of the field and my relationships with the other lawyers practicing in the field and all these reported cases, I mean, it's no secret. I mean, the families are getting treated very, very badly. The museums are winning most of the cases. And so we put together legislation that tried to restore the original intent of what Congress had legislated. And so in December, that bill passed the U.S. Senate on unanimous consent. And then it went over to the House. It kind of sat there for a couple of months. We were, worried about the forces against us, and there were. The German government, the museums were against this legislation. The French railroad, who deported 75,000 Jews to Auschwitz, they hired big-time lobbyists to fight this legislation. We had, however, some great help from people like Elizabeth Brody, talking to people in Washington, to say, look, this is important morally, historically to the community. And today that bill passed the U.S. House of Representatives on voice vote unanimously. So my phone has definitely been blowing up today because, Harley's right, it is a historic achievement. And it's going to help families get their art back. And for the survivor community, which, thanks to David, I've represented for over 25 years, they don't have to have art themselves to care a lot about the other families getting their family legacies returned. It means everything to all of them. And so in the survivor community, the fact that Congress has stepped up on a bipartisan basis to eliminate some of these obstacles to them having no one's asking them to be given the art back. It's just, let us get to the merits. If you can prove you owned it and that it was taken by the Nazis, you should get it back. So the things don't happen in Congress that easily. And we were very, very excited, pleased, and thrilled that we've established this benchmark in history that's going to move forward to not only allow families to get their artworks back, but And this is a problem which, for those of you in the art world who know others in the art world, I want to say this plainly. The museums, the foreign governments, there's a lot of Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism in the way these institutions fight these cases. And so one of our motivations was, this is not just about the art, it's about the stories, what happened to these families. And so this legislation is going to push forward in documenting the realities of the Holocaust and not allowing the people who want to keep stolen art to sweep it under the carpet and really corrupt history. So
Yeah, Sam, I think, nailed it. So it's also the stories of the families. It raises all kinds of ethical questions about if someone has it, what's their right to return it? Someone could say, well, I bought it. I didn't know, but now I own it. And Sam could comment on that. When I was speaking to Sam prior to this, I asked him, I said, give me some data on what happened to all the art at the end of World War II. And he said that, you've seen it in some of the movies, Monument Men, and what were the other ones, movies about it?
Rape of Europa.
I'm sorry, what?
Rape of Europa.
Right,
That's a documentary.
right,
Yes.
that one. And there are others that talk about it. What was it, Denise?
the train.
Right. So what happened is about 60% were given to the countries where the artwork came from. 40% is unaccounted for. And today, David Milch told me it's conservatively estimated there's over 100,000 pieces that have still not, that they have no idea where it is. So what Sam explained was that, so of the 60% that went to a country, let's just say Poland, for example, how much of that actually got to the heirs or the descendants or to the victims who miraculously survived? An incredibly small number. No one knows exactly, but it could be anywhere between 1 and 5% of the 60% at best got to actually the people that really own it. Because as Sam explained, somebody has it, they put it up in their bedroom or their living room. They love a Picasso and they don't tell anyone, and their children keep it and their grandchildren keep it. And you have that from corrupt officials to people who are anti-Semitic, to people who are just don't care. And as Sam said, the courts, people were not being helpful. When a lot of Jews put money who had means in Swiss bank accounts, and if a survivor family went to the Swiss bank account, they said without proof of death or without the original person who opened the account, you cannot get your money. That was a huge battle you had for a long time. So share with us a little bit about what are the moral and ethical issues relating to provenance and museums that have these pieces.
Can you tell us a little bit about the case?
The case?
Yes.
Sure, okay. Sure. So in my work for the survivor community, I was introduced to the Cassirer family. Claude Cassirer was a Holocaust survivor from Germany. And his ancestors, Paul and Bruno Cassirer, owned a art gallery and publishing house in Berlin. Now the Cassirers they were not quite at the Rothschilds level, but they were close. They were extremely wealthy, successful Jewish family in all walks of life. So the generation that could enjoy that wealth, started an art gallery and publishing house, and were among the first advocates and supporters of the Impressionist movement itself. They bought a Pissarro Paris streetscape, Rue Saint-Honoré, in the afternoon, the effect of rain, from Pissarro's exclusive agent in 1900. So that was in the family for many decades, and it was owned by Lily Cassirer. He descended to Lily Cassirer, one of the members of the family, who in 1939, after Kristallnacht, decided she had to get out of Germany and she had to relinquish the paint to the Gestapo in order to get an exit visa. So Germany confiscated the painting. She survived. Her second husband was a very famous medical school professor who was, thank God, given a visa to go to England, where a lot of his former students were at Oxford. So they were able to escape. But the painting disappeared, and it was traded underground. It was smuggled into the United States in 1951. It was traded underground among some wealthy people for 25 years. It ended up in New York in a art gallery where the person who came to look at it was Baron Hans Heinrich von Thyssen-Bornemisza. He recognized the name Thyssen Steel, armed the Third Reich, was Hitler's earliest, financial and political supporters. He was the son. He was, Swiss, with the second largest art collection in Europe. So he buys this painting, which has all the labels stripped off the back, but as you see in the materials, partial label from the Cassier Gallery, Berlin, Victoria Strasse, Kunst und Ver, which is the name of their. So he buys this, he sends it back to his curator and says, I bought this in Paris. Well, he bought it in Manhattan. So he lies about the provenance of it. He keeps it in his bedroom for 12 years, and then, not passing judgment, but his fifth wife was a former Miss Spain, so he donated his whole collection to Spain. He sold it for a fifth of its value. So it ends up in this collection called in Spain, paid a fraction of the value. They rehabbed this Villa Hermosa to house his entire collection. So Claude Cassier was a Holocaust survivor. He played under this painting in his grandmother's parlor as a child. And there's a photograph, and the photograph is in the materials too, of the painting hanging over Lily's sofa. So he would show his friends, look, I mean, he survived the Holocaust. He was a photographer in Cleveland. He was a very active member of the community. In those days, for a survivor to go and talk to schools and all that was unusual, because it hadn't sort of become more common among them. So he was very active in the Jewish community, in the political community, in the arts community. And then he retired to San Diego when one of his former clients called him up and said, I think I found your grandmother's painting in the collection of the Thyssen family. So he asked Spain for the painting back. He said, here's a picture of it hanging in my grandmother's parlor, and I'm the only heir. And they told him basically, how do we know you're, all of the kinds of cruel, disgusting arguments against giving it back, and then basically just said, tough, So at that point, he didn't really have many options, okay? In 2004, the Supreme Court decided a case called Altman versus Austria. And if you know the movie The Woman in Gold, it's about that case. And in Altman versus Austria, the Supreme Court said a statute that was passed in 1976 to allow you to sue foreign governments if the property was taken in violation of international law, and the foreign institution does business in the United States, it can apply to actions that occurred previously. So you can take that 76 statute and apply it to Holocaust claims. That opened the door for the Cassier family to sue the Spanish government and the Spanish Museum in the United States. So that case was filed in 2005. I was an informal advisor to the family during that time. I wasn't, I was suing insurance companies. I was busy with a lot of stuff, and that was one I couldn't undertake on my own. But in 2015, they wanted to change lawyers. They asked me if I knew David Boies. I knew his law partner, Steve Zach. So I teamed up with the Boies Schiller firm to represent the family, and that was in 2015. So the Odyssey, and I'll tell you more about how all that went, but that's the case. So Spain has it, the Cassier family owns it, and the courts, we won several rounds, but the ultimate decision is this choice of law issue, which has been going on for 10 years now. We've been to the Supreme Court twice. We've won, but that was only to keep the case alive. After we lost it the second time, the state of California passed a statute that said, in a case involving looted art by a California resident, California law applies. Now again, under American law and California law, a thief can never convey good title to stolen property, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many people buy it. You don't buy what the person who sells it to you doesn't have, and the thief doesn't have good title. So under California law, the family wins. In Spain, it's finders keepers. 3 years of adverse possession, you can get good title to stolen property in Spain. And 6 years, even if you acquire it in bad faith, which the judge in our case actually said Spain acquired it in bad faith, but after 6 years, they get title. So they kept ruling that Spanish law applied. At that point, the first issue was whether, one set of the federal rules or the state rules would control the choice of law issue. The federal court in California, the Ninth Circuit, said that this federal common law would determine choice of law. And that under federal common law, which sort of emphasizes the location of the transaction, hey, it was bought in Spain, it's in Spain now, Spanish law applies. Well, that was our first big opening because that was wrong, okay? And not only was it wrong, thank God, it was in conflict with the law of 4 other federal circuits, where they said, no, the law of the forum state determines what rules you apply to decide choice of law. So we filed a cert petition basically saying there's a split in the circuits and California choice of law should apply. We got certiorari, we won 9-0. That yes, under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, state law should govern the choice of law. So that was pretty good. That was pretty unusual. And you think, and the Supreme Court appended the painting and the picture of the painting in Lily's parlor to its decision, which never happens, okay? So we thought we were in good shape. Unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit didn't see it that way, and they once again ruled that, so then under the California framework, it's not where's the location of the art, it's which jurisdiction's interests would be more harmed if the other jurisdiction's law were to be applied. A balancing, okay? Well, California has an ironclad rule. You can't get good title to stolen property. Spain, it's true, it's finders keepers, but they've also signed all these international agreements that say you're supposed to give it back. So we argued that their interests were sort of neutral, whereas California's interests were strongly in favor of returning it. Ninth Circuit again rules against us. Didn't even mention the California law that strongly favors giving the property back to the rightful owner. All this justification that Spain's interest in the certainty of commercial transactions means that you've got to enforce their finders keepers law. I mean, really just an awful, terrible, intellectually dishonest decision.
That's the Ninth Circuit.
That was in the Ninth Circuit. So anyway, so on rehearing, we had two judges said, this is crazy, this is not only wrong on California law, but you're basically vindicating Nazism by letting Spain keep this painting. But we didn't get enough votes to get that reversed. What I did do, however, was I went to the California legislature, thanks to David Schachter, and David's nephew, Darrell Steinberg, was the mayor of Sacramento. He introduced me to the legislative leaders in California. This is going to be on TV or on the website. This is breaking news, everybody, how this came about. But that's the truth of the matter. And so the California legislature passed a law that said, in looted art cases, California law applies. And so we took that back to the Supreme Court, who said, yeah, there's a new law in effect, go back and try again. And right now, we're headed back to that same judge to say California law applies. Now, what happened today in Washington will give us even more wind at our backs, because to have a federal law that says what this new law says is very, very powerful.
So that family had a survivor, the wife and a son, and they have means, and they were fortunate to find you. What happens to the artwork of the majority of Jews whose entire families perished?
Well, if their entire families perished, there are these international agreements that say those should be found and they should be, liquidated, and the proceeds should go to help the community, help survivors, and all that. That almost never happens because it's hard to find this stuff. Okay, there's a growing body of provenance researchers, field of provenance research, and Germany, to its credit, is funding a lot of it. But it's still very, very small relative to the 100,000 that remain unreturned. So one of the things now, the museums ethical associations have ethical codes that say you're supposed to do the research, you're supposed to publish the research, you're supposed to, if you find something, you're supposed to give it back. The State Department did a report in 2020 that said museums are just not doing that nearly to the degree they're supposed to, nearly to the degree that their ethical codes require, or of these international agreements. There's one in 1998, the Washington Principles, you might have heard of that. There was one in 2009, the Terezin Declaration, says museums are supposed to do the research, publish it, and if they find it, give it back. They're non-binding legally, and the courts have basically said, screw this, we don't have to enforce it, and they haven't.
So the law that was just passed today, what does it mean exactly? In
So,
simple layman's
In
terms.
simple layman's terms, it says that you can't lose your artwork based upon the passage of time. So like in my case, the judge, if this federal law had been in effect, although it really said this previously, and the Congress said this, it said like you didn't listen to us last time, but adverse possession, acquisitive prescription, if it's a foreign law based upon the passage of time, you can't apply that to a Holocaust art claim, okay? There's another similar doctrine called laches, and what that means is that you waited too long to bring the case. Even if you brought it within the statute of limitations, you knew and you should have brought it earlier because the museum is going to be prejudiced by the fact that witnesses died or whatever. So that's been a real thorn in the side of the families because that's totally subjective. And if the judge says, yeah, I think they waited too long, which has happened in many, many cases, the family loses. And that's really almost unreviewable on appeal. Congress said, no, that's the passage of time. Who the heck is a judge in the year 2026 to judge whether a Holocaust, family who, the patriarch had the art, it was looted by the Gestapo, they escaped. In many cases, they were lucky to get out of there. 2 or 3 generations later, they don't necessarily know or want to make the effort, or wouldn't know where to find it because the holders today conceal the art. It's a fact. I mean, that's one of the reasons I brought this book. Goring's Man in Paris, it's about what you're talking about. What were these people doing after the war, okay? Well, this is about Losa, who was Goring's Man in Paris. I mean, he went to the Jeu de Paume, which was the gallery outside of the Louvre where the Nazis kept all of their art. That's in the train, that's the institution in the train. He was a Nazi, he killed people to get art, he acquired it for Goring. He not only outlived the war, but he was acquitted of being of war crimes, and he basically just stayed in the business and was trading with all the same people who were doing it during the war, including monuments men who were working in major American museums in very high positions. So the respectable world turned a blind eye to all of this looted art, and that's one of the reasons why for people to be able to get it today, it's a very tall order.
People don't realize, but the Holocaust was the largest theft in history. So what inspired you to get involved in doing all this pro bono work more than a quarter century ago to help survivors and victims be able to recover their lost art or other items or money that rightfully belongs to their family?
Well, go back to 1997. We were I was just coming out of the Clinton administration. We had moved our family from Miami to Washington. I was in the Justice Department. Our family moved to Washington, D.C. in the mid-90s, and I served in the Clinton administration, and our kids were young. We came back in the 1996 or 97, and that was when the stories were coming out about the Swiss bank guards who were shredding the records of the Jews whose bank accounts they had been looting. So this became a big international sensation, and I had been active in the legal community, the political community, the Jewish community. I was on the Federation board, I was on the Federation Executive Committee, and I worked closely with many of the Holocaust survivors, like David Schachter was very close. His family and my wife's family were together, grew up around the University of Miami, so I'd known David for a very long time. David Mermelstein, Herbie Carliner, people who were they were pillars of their community through their survival and what they stood for down here. And so they came to me and said, look, everyone's talking about these looted assets. We, the survivors, are never at the table when these decisions are made. It's made by institutions who are far away without our input, and everyone wants to take credit and everyone wants to act like they're doing good, but we, the people whose families were annihilated and who lost everything, this is our legacy, and we need a voice. And so that, and I had never really understood that, to be honest with you, even though I'd been active in the community for a long time. And they also said, and by the way, we have a lot of survivors living in poverty who no one's helping. And that didn't make any sense to me either. But I checked, I had been around long enough to know who to ask those things, and sure enough, that was true. And we did a sort of an audit of what we were even doing in Miami, and I'm not proud of it, but I'm proud that we understood it and tried to do something about it, which was there was a long waiting list of survivors, in their 70s, and 80s who weren't getting home care, even though, they had suffered, much worse physical and emotional damage, than other elderly their age, and they weren't getting the help they needed. So, that motivated me to, just get more and more involved. And then with the insurance policies, Allianz, Generali, AXA, you've heard of them, right? They were there, okay, and they were selling insurance policies to Jews in pre-war, in Poland, in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia, in France, and they were big. I mean, in Italy, obviously, Generali was an Italian company. They went into the Jewish markets on Mondays and Thursdays, and members of the congregations were selling to their congregationists, and basically saying, and in the 30s, they were doing it, telling people, look, we've got assets in the United States, so if anything happens here, this money is good. Well, yeah, they understood things were happening. Allianz not only sold insurance policies to Jews throughout Europe, they were providing insurance to the SS for the construction of Auschwitz, Birkenau, the Lodz Ghetto, and tell me an insurance company who doesn't go to the site that they're insuring to see what they're paying for, right? So this, to me was a scandal of historic proportions, and these are the wealthiest, companies in the world, and they're out there. Allianz is holding a charity golf tournament in Boca Raton. The Holocaust survivors demonstrated outside that tournament in Boca Raton for 7 consecutive years, and David and Sydney were there, and after 7 years they folded their tent and went away. So it was a big deal for these elderly people and people in the community supporting them to say, look, they can't masquerade as being charitable when they stole the money. So that's the level of, you can see my level.
Financed the war.
They definitely financed the war, and they financed the Holocaust. I mean, they insured the Holocaust. So, at the same time, they're not. So after the war, yes, families who did survivors went to Generali and said, and I've got clients who did this. I mean, I've got the documentation for this. My father bought an insurance policy from Generali. Well, if you would just show us the policy documents, we'd be happy to look it up.
And the death certificate.
If you just show us a death certificate. So for years and years and years, that all went under the carpet because, these are survivors. They were skin and bones. They were happy to be alive and to move forward in life. They couldn't call a plaintiff's lawyer or, the insurance commissioner of their state, to get a restitution. So they moved on with life. But after the Swiss bank, situation where the guard was shredding the documents of the Jews, and by the way, that guard who turned his co-guards in, he didn't get an award from Switzerland. He was prosecuted for violating Swiss secrecy laws. So that was the attitude that kind of prevailed for the first period here, where they said they were going to be looking into it. So like with the insurance policies, they set up a commission, and the commission was controlled by the insurance companies. They were going to publish the names of the policyholders. Well, first they denied it ever doing it, and then a journalist found a huge warehouse in Trieste full of Generali policies from that period of time that were never paid. So okay, well, but they lapsed, blah blah. So there were all these bogus processes that were set up to give the appearance of justice and restitution. They were utter failures, and so we just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. We tried to get legislation in Congress to allow the insurance companies to be sued, but we lost that. I mean, when we had tremendous supporters, Ileana Ross-Layton was unbelievable, for years and years and years. Bill Nelson, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I mean, we had. So
Ileana Ross-Layton was the congresswoman in this area before she retired.
Incredible.
Foreign Affairs too, I think.
She was chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So we got very, very far, but the insurance industry has so much, leverage in Washington. It's disgusting. I mean, they just own everybody, and so that was maybe unrealistic, but the historical record that we established. I mean, I testified 4 times in Congress on this issue, and put all this documentation into the record. Speaking of the University of Miami, they're going to be taking my work, my Holocaust litigation records, and making it part of their a special collection. So, what happened is not going to be lost on history. It'll be part of the University of Miami collection, which we hope will be used by academics and researchers.
So it's interesting you say that. Another theme here is repairing history. So what does that mean in the context of collecting art, exhibiting art, and returning art?
Well, take my client David Kassir, as an example. I mean, his father was the grandson of the owner of the painting, and he was a survivor. His grandmother was alive, so he spent a lot of time with him during those years when she was still alive, and they talked about what happened to the family, what happened to the art. So this was a part of his life, forever. The Kassir family was, like I said, they had a tremendous, place, in the cultural world of Germany at that time, in the business world, but that was all destroyed, that was all lost. And so the painting became really a icon of what the family had and what it had been, and his father lived with it for all those years. So to then find it, 50 years after the fact, and then have Spain tell him, no, it's really not yours, you don't deserve it, and then and his dad, was 80 when they found it, so had they given it back to him, he could have, donated it to the museum, brought people in, and talked about everything that meant to his family. No, they're fighting it. So, and I just learned a couple of days ago that the Berlin Museum is going to hold a special retrospective on Paul Kassir. So the great uncle who bought this painting from Pissarro's exclusive agent originally, and it's like we didn't make this up for a court case or for Congress. And this is the history of the the Impressionist movement, through German eyes. So yeah, I mean, getting that painting back and having it acknowledged that this belonged to the family and that they own it, it's theirs. That's when you talk about repair and restitution, that's where that all comes together.
I want to say, often when you have a speaker, you acknowledge the speaker, people say it's an honor to have them. It really is an honor to have Sam Dubbin. We live in a world that is consumed by a little too much of materialism and frivolousness, for lack of a better word. It's inspiring to be with somebody who really has spent a huge amount of his life, of his adult life, fighting for justice, for victims who are not here anymore, who can't fight for themselves, who may have descendants who are looking for help. And he has given a quarter of a century of his life without any income to make this world a better place. It's an honor for us, I think, to be in your company, Sam. It really is. You're what gives, I think, us hope that there are really good, caring people who have a generosity of spirit like Sam does and is high-minded and wants to repair and culture and wants to do justice for victims. So we all admire you and thank you so much. This is such an historic and you must be so happy, and so that after all these years, you went to the Supreme Court twice. Today is the day that you won.
Well, we're close. We're close. We still need the judge to agree that these laws, are going to favor us. So we don't have the painting back, and we don't have the judges saying what we believe this law means. Okay, so we still have some steps in the process.
That's all right. I'm pretty confident, that if he's accomplished this much. I also want to thank Mary Elena for organizing this. During the briefing, Mary Elena had the task for my wife to make sure I shut up and to make sure it's not about me, but about him. Never easy. So Mary Elena Marie had to manage that. Mary Elena says, I have permission to shut you up and make sure we stay on the agenda. And I said, fair enough. So thank her.
What happens tomorrow, though? If we want to follow to see how the resolution of this with this new federal law.
So, what happens next is that under the Constitution, once the law passes both houses of Congress, the president has 10 days to either veto it or sign it. If he doesn't veto it, it becomes law without his signature in 10 days. As long as Congress is in session, we're good after 10 days, okay? You might have noticed that the president has said he's not signing any legislation until Congress amends the voting rights. He basically, does something on voting rights, okay? I won't get into that. But we don't need him to
But is there
sign it.
anybody else here that has a question or a comment?
Yeah, I would love to hear from the art community.
Yeah,
I mean,
anybody.
because, yes.
Please, just speak up if you would.
Yes, hi, I'm Diane. I was living in Paris during this whole period when, you were starting this in 2007 or 5. And I went to many exhibitions, not many, but a few, in Germany especially, that were organized around the theme of the stolen art. So I know that people in Europe are very concerned about this issue, and that here, it's not so much on the radar, but I really appreciate your efforts, and hopefully we can get more people in the U.S. informed and let them know what's going on.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, look, the truth of the matter is all these countries have signed these agreements, and they're not fully living up to it. But, when they find something that's, $50 or $100,000, they give it back. Okay, when it's a Van Gogh that's worth $100 million, they go to war.
And the value of the painting.
Pissarro.
Yeah.
So this painting, let me add this about the painting, because it was painted by, Pissarro was Jewish. People may not realize that. And he was, forgive me for saying this, he was kind of stereotypically, looking Jewish. He kind of looked like a rabbi. And in the 1890s, the Dreyfus affair was roiling France. It was a terrible time for Jewish people, and to the point where he was literally feared for his life. And he, instead of painting outdoors like he always had before, he painted these Paris streetscapes from the second floor of the Hotel du Louvre in Paris. So that was the origin of this particular painting. Most of them now are, and so there's about 13 or 14 of them. The difference, like the Montmartre and Rue Saint Honoré, like this one, they're all in the Hermitage and major institutions. A few of them are in private hands. So one of these sold for $34 million in 2014. Not quite as nice as this one. I'm told by the experts that they double in value about every 10 years. But not many were looted, in the Holocaust, and fought for by the government that shouldn't have held on to it. Been to the Supreme Court twice. And Pissarro is also sort of having a moment now in art. You guys may know this more than me. The Denver Art Museum had a major exhibition of his works. And, again, I don't pretend to know that much about art, but what I'm reading is that, he's like the father of Impressionism. And this series, bless you, Paris Streetscapes is, like one of the finest achievements of the Impressionist movement. So, you put all that together, the experts who we talked to, well, the other thing is that there are the Klimt paintings from The Woman in Gold. They sold for $135 million 20 years ago. Another Klimt, owned by Leonard Lauder, Ronald Lauder's brother, exceeded the auction expectations by $100 million. That just sold for $235 million. So, I mean, our experts say that the floor for this is probably $100 million today.
Any other? Yes.
Yeah, Sam, are there any institutions, arts institutions or museums that you found are doing the right thing or better than the others in terms of honoring the mission and what it is that you all are trying to do?
I
doing the right thing?
Yeah, there are places in Europe at the Berggruen Museum and museums in Berlin. And
Well, some do. I mean, some do, but some don't. I mean, that's the reality. And what I really believe to be the case is some do some, and maybe a little more, and others do some that are token in the sense that, hey, look, we're giving it back. We're having a ceremony. The family's here. Let me tell you about the Egon Schieles, okay? Fritz Grunbaum was an Austrian cabaret performer. He was a lawyer. He was the role model for the Joel Grey figure in Cabaret. He was a real person. And he was a big critic of the Nazis, and he owned magnificent art collection, including 80 paintings or drawings by Egon Schiele. He was taken to Dachau, forced to sign his collection over to, theoretically to his wife, but in reality, his wife was also in a concentration camp. So that was the beginning of what, and again, all these things were documented. So, oh yes, it was all under duress, to put it mildly. I mean, he was killed in Dachau, so he never left Dachau. And so the Schieles then disappeared for decades, okay? And the same thing happened, by the way, to the Pissarro. The Spanish didn't expose this painting to the public until they believed that under Swiss law, they got good title. Because under Swiss law, you get good title after 5 years. And that's well documented. So the Schieles were then, started to dribble into the marketplace. And Grunbaum's heirs brought a few lawsuits like this, okay? Anyone who knew, in the art world, they knew that Grunbaum was Jewish, and and Schieles' paintings were mostly collected by Jews, just like, a lot like Pissarro's, by the way. So they ended up in all these museums over here, okay? And every one of them has fought like hell to hang on to it. And there's several major cases. Some of the cases that are addressed by this legislation arose out of the Egon Schieles. But I bring it up because the Manhattan District Attorney has a whole division devoted to restitution of looted cultural assets. And a lot of it is, Colombian and African art and things like that all should be restituted to their countries. But they went after 8 of these Schieles in major museums around the country, okay? Chicago Art Museum is one. Ronald Lauder actually had one. One of the universities had one. So they used the criminal law process because all these went through New York, and it's a crime to own stolen property and to trade in stolen property. So they basically had these guys over a legal barrel criminally. But all the museums had to be, when the family asked for it back, it was like, well, come and get it. When the prosecutor showed up, they were able to secure these. So in general, they fight and don't give it back. But again, some do the research, some publish it. The data shows that, maybe 20% of the museums are doing some of the research, publishing some of the research. So they're just, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. They're trying to look good, but they're not doing the right thing.
Sam, let me ask you,
sorry.
what surprised you the most in your quarter-century fight for justice?
The extent to which these museums and insurance companies and foreign governments will engage in anti-Semitic stereotyping and essential Holocaust denial in order to hold on to these things. That's,
So, I'm sorry, I'm uneducated on the
No, don't.
case, but, so Ronald Lauder and the Chicago Art Museum fight to keep these?
Not Lauder. Lauder gave it back. I didn't mean to suggest that he did.
Oh.
When it was discovered, but it did take a warrant, from the district attorney to get that back from him. Whether he would have given it back or not independently, I can't say. I mean, the guy has a lot of art. I'm not, he's been a supporter of of all the legislation, so his heart is in the right place. And I'm just saying that's how widespread the ownership of these paintings are. And in terms, including respectable, the Santa Monica Museum had one of these. The Chicago Institute of Art, by the way, well, a lot of them are the worst. They're among the worst. They're fighting like hell over everything, including paintings that no one disputes were looted by the Nazis. And they're really pushing this, the statutes of limitations, the latches, you should have brought it earlier, as if when they buy, and this is my message to the art world, and I'd like to know what your views about this. Because they say, well, someone buys it in good faith, well, isn't that unfair? Well, the answer is, to me, it should always be buyer beware. And the museums and the institutions and the collectors have to be the guardians. And that's the way you prevent stolen property from being, acquired by others.
Well, Sam, isn't it, they got, with the provenance, it became a very big deal to have good provenance.
Well, it should.
Maybe 20
It should, but again,
years ago.
so what we're finding with these researchers, and the provenance researchers are going out there, is a lot of these paintings are listed as, private collection 1932 to 1940. I mean, you see that all the time. So if you're a collector, if you're the Met, if you're, the National Gallery of Art, and it says private collection, during World War II, you know damn well that that's looted. And so, to me, there's a responsibility bigger than, to be the guardian for that.
Denise,
So I come out of a museum background. True, it's only the University of Miami's museum, but I was there for 25 years.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Like Carly
Yeah,
said, no.
Correct. And I can tell you that part of the problem with identifying specious or non-existent or, downright fraudulent provenance.
can you speak up, Denise? Speak up.
Is staffing. There are now databases that all museums, I don't know about Europe, but I know about America, has access to, obviously, with the internet. But it requires staff and dedicated staff to locate these. And I can tell you that in the case of museums such as the Met, they have been behind the 8 ball trying to identify looted Greco-Roman and Italian property for years, for decades. And so this is just another layer of identification. And I think the City of New York and New York State are, relative to what's going on in the country, to be commended. They have been doing their best. They do have dedicated staff. The Lowell Museum has a beautiful Monet. They've had it for years. Where does it come from? The person that gave it to us, some old lady in 1950 donated it to the Low after World War II. I mean, I wouldn't want to twist from a rope to figure out where she got it from and where the provenance records really lie. But for the most case, I think museums are doing their best.
Well, the State Department doesn't agree with that,
They didn't know.
and the World Jewish Restitution Organization doesn't agree with that. And, those were both cited by the sponsors of this legislation today, which says, the museum ethical guidelines say they're supposed to do that, the Washington principles say they're supposed to do that, the Terezin Declaration says they're supposed to do that, but, only a small percentage are doing the research, fewer are publishing it, and most of them, when they're caught, or when they find one, some will give it back, most don't, and most aggressively will defend their ability to hang on to it. And maybe they're not the richest, but most of these institutions have a lot of resources. I know that the lawyers we're fighting against for Spain, make a lot of money, because they not only represent Spain, in my case, they represent Hungary in major cases over, looted art by Hungary. I mean, they represent all the bad guys, and that's their field, okay? They hold seminars with